Leslie Hubbard. I'm the Assistant Director at the Salada Institute. And thank you for taking part in our final Careers in Climate Action speaker series focused on careers in investing and finance. We have a great panel tonight, and I am so thrilled to introduce them to you. So please join me in welcoming first Jock Gilchrist, who joins us as the Vice President of Sustainability at JPMorgan Chase. He has a background in climate policy and finance, and he recently completed Yale's Financing and Deploying Clean Energy Certificate program, and he also holds a master's degree in environmental science and policy with a concentration in climate policy from Johns Hopkins University. And he's recognized as an emerging leader by environmental entrepreneurs, and he focuses on advancing sustainability initiatives across the financial sector. So welcome, Jock. And next to Jock is Nisha Desai, who is the founder and CEO of Intention, a climate impact investment platform for retail investors and consumers, and the managing partner of the Intention Climate Fund, a microfund investing in early stage climate tech startups across the US. And she brings decades of leadership across 6 energy startups, including NRG Energy and Actual Sun. And Nisha also advised Puerto Rico's energy transformation post-Hurricane Maria and serves on several climate innovation boards, including Work on Climate. And she earned her MBA from Harvard Business School and her BA from Yale. So welcome. And please welcome Vid Mićević.
Yes.
Fantastic, who's an investor at Collaborative Fund, which is a $1 billion venture capital firm supporting transformative companies across climate, food, health, consumer, tech, and industrial innovation. The fund's portfolio includes category-defining companies as Beyond Meat, Lyft, Dandelion Energy, and Brimstone. And with a decade of experience, Vid combines investor and operator expertise to back social impact entrepreneurs to drive meaningful change. He's also the founder of Climate DC, which hopefully you can talk a little bit more about, and co-founder of 33 Buckets, focused on global water access. And he holds an MBA from Quantic School of Business and Technology. So welcome. And our final panelist, Michael Kaschak, who is the Director of Impact Investments at NatureVest at the Nature Conservancy here in Boston, where he is responsible for originating, structuring, and closing investment opportunities that deliver both conservation outcomes and market rate returns. And with 15 plus years in sustainable finance, he specializes in conservation-focused investments across agriculture, water, and land. And Michael previously led private equity and water management initiatives in the United States and globally. And he earned his MBA from Boston University and holds a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from Amherst College. So thank you everybody for joining us tonight. The point of the speaker series is to learn more about their individual career journeys, how they got interested in climate, how their background in education has facilitated some of this interest and their professional development, and then learn a little bit more about the intricacies of the work that they do and some skills that are necessary and advice that they have for students who want to pursue this field. So as I start the conversation, think about this larger framing, and we'll also have an opportunity for questions and answers for the students here. So first question, tell us a little bit about why you work in climate and finance and interested in sustainability, where that started for you in your journey, and talk a little bit about how your education has weaved into this journey. You want to start?
Kick it off,
Yeah.
So first of all, thank you so much for having us. Thank you all for being here. So I'm in this field because I'm an environmentalist. I've always sort of identified that way. I grew up hanging out outdoors, canoeing, camping, hiking. It's always been sort of an important part of my identity. And I think that for a lot of us who come to this work in this field because we're environmentalists and we like nature, I feel like there's a sense that nature it's more than just a place to rest and recreate and a place that has beauty. There's something inherently valuable about it, like economic value even. And we have statistics to back that up. So the statistic that I recently read is that 55% of global GDP is moderately or highly dependent on nature and the services it provides. So that's $58 trillion. So for me, this field combines something that's personally meaningful and important with something that the world needs to focus on and that has immense pragmatic value, and you can solve very material problems for society. So it's a great combination of those things. My path to climate finance in particular was very roundabout. I did not study this as an undergrad. I studied neuroscience. Spent my first couple of years doing community health related work. But then, sort of had this dawning realization that I wanted to work in climate. So I started doing policy advocacy work at the state level in California. Did that for about 5 years, picked up a master's degree along the way. And then towards the end of that, I was doing some work on climate finance, which got me curious and also sort of built my conviction that finance is really a key lever that can unlock a faster energy transition. So I was sort of lucky to land at JPMorgan, where I've been for the last 3 years. I'm on the corporate sustainability team there, and I'll talk more about that in a bit. But I hope that my path is an example that there's really no one right way to get to this field, and that sort of multiple types of backgrounds can be valuable.
Awesome. Same question for you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for having us. It's really an honor to be here. So I was a little bit different in that, I didn't come to this as like a born environmentalist. But I was always someone that was always very passionate about like doing something that was good for society. And so, my first job, and by the way, like my undergrad, I did political science and economics, and when I graduated, I literally thought that I was going to go eventually get a PhD in economics and then go work for the government or something like that. But I happened to think about like paying my student loans, and hey, how about I go get a job in management consulting, right? And so I was fortunate to get a job in management consulting, but they assigned me to the energy industry. Because the company I had joined had different industry groups, and actually I'd actually asked to be part of the energy group because I had interned with them the summer before, and there was someone who had presented from the energy group and was just like, well, I'm not an MBA, I actually have a Master of Public Administration, and there's a lot of public policy issues that are kind of come with the energy industry. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. That sounds more interesting than kind of marketing toothpaste. So how about I go there? And by the way, I knew nothing about anything really. So that was really fascinating, right? I had literally thought I was going to go be an academic, and now I'm in industry, working in consulting, working on a wide range of problems. I had the opportunity to really be working on electricity stuff when this was in the very, very earliest stages of the electricity industry deregulating. You might hear nowadays about people trading electricity. So when I had joined this consulting company, no one was doing that. It was just wow, right? That this concept even existed. So very early on in my career, I was exposed within the energy industry to some of the kind of business model innovation that was resulting in a lot of change in the energy industry. And so then I went to business school, and then I went to this company called Enron. You may have heard of it. Enron. And Enron was doing a lot of there's this stuff you read about in the press, but then actually there was huge amounts of innovation. I mean, they were not just trading power, but trading broadband, and finance innovation was really kind of one of the keys, risk management, analytics, finance. That's what Enron was really, really good at. And so this was at a time for me post business school, right? And I was just and that really introduced me to the world of entrepreneurship, and because Enron was working on all these kind of innovative new products and starting up new companies. And so I went to one of Enron's companies that was a new startup. And then I left that to join another startup that was in the energy industry, and then another one. And so, but then but the startups in energy were generally about doing something that was environmental or cleaner or whatever. And so in 2002, a long time ago, I was working on energy storage, okay? So really my kind of descent into climate, it was really like having been in energy and then going to energy technology and the kind of always having this like desire to be working on the stuff that was making things like cleaner, greener, more efficient. And so now, a couple decades later, there's just so much more stuff going on, the technologies. I've had the good fortune of being kind of on the innovation side of things, but also that foundation from Enron. I mean, this is a really capital-intensive industry, and so how you finance things and investing in things has just also been this thread through my career. So let me stop there.
Very cool.
Hard to beat that career, but there's a lot to share, and I really appreciate everybody here want to dive deep into these stories. And now I'm going to actually start a little bit more on the personal front. My name, Vid Mićević, is, you could probably tell, probably somewhere from Eastern Europe, and that's pretty accurate. I was originally born, though, in South Africa, out of all places, because there's a war in Bosnia, where my parents are from, and they fled to South Africa. And at the time, my first memory while I was in South Africa, my dad is like the biggest hippie I know. He loves camping, loves composting, was the first person to buy an electric vehicle, like you name it, he's done it. But camping has been some of my earliest memories, and the first memory I remember, I was in a yellow tent and I opened up the zipper, and I remember it was storm blew by and there was just like these water droplets on a spider web, and the sun was like scintillating through these water droplets, and there was like this beautiful like rainbow that got created. I'm like, that was my first memory. I'm like, nature's pretty cool. This world we live in is so beautiful. And just as I started growing up, I eventually made my way to the U.S. At age 5, and I've always thought about I've gotten this golden lottery ticket to a better life, but what about my friends back in South Africa, back in Bosnia? How do I use this lottery ticket to do something good for the world? My mom is an electrical engineer, my dad's an architect, and I was like, perfect, let me just marry those two things that I know and I see all the time, and maybe I can build green buildings. Maybe that's the world I wanted to go into. And so there's Arizona State at the time when I applied, they have the School of Sustainability, and I ended up getting a sustainable engineering degree. Realized I was a terrible engineer, but I loved working with people. Through that degree, I realized quickly that I initially wanted to go into international development work. How do we help emerging markets scale and become more developed, but without all the GHG emissions that's needed to do that and to industrialize. But when I worked with the UN and realized how slow moving all these orgs were and how big these problems were, I was like, there's got to be better ways to solve these problems. And then finally I found something that really spoke to me in undergrad. There's this class I took called Engineering Projects in Community Service. Essentially, you brought a bunch of engineers together and you have to solve problems in your local community. And you learn this lean launch methodology, essentially. How do you rapidly prototype to learn from the community and so on to build solutions. And from that started this company with other engineers as co-founders called 33 Buckets. And we realized we initially wanted to build the best new water filter out there, realized there's so many great water filters already, but the access to those water filters were the biggest challenge and the behavioral sort of shift needed. And so we ended up doing micro-franchise distribution models in Bangladesh, Peru, and Dominican Republic. And I still remember being a 19-year-old talking to the mayor of Cusco trying to solidify a $2 million deal to with my really rudimentary Spanish, and I was like, why am I in this room right now? The imposter syndrome was so high. But then realizing after that whole experience, this is what it takes to make this world a better place. Like, it depends on those people that like have an idea, that want to make this world better, and would want to throw everything they have at it. And so since then, I've been obsessed with supporting entrepreneurs that want to make this world even more sustainable too. So I've been in the incubator accelerator scene for a while, and now on the venture capital scene, really finding and sourcing some of the best and brightest entrepreneurs to help scale them up and make a big difference in the world. And I can talk more about that in other responses, but I appreciate you going through the whole journey, because I feel like that's pretty helpful.
That's great. That's great. Thanks to all of you. It's very nice to meet you. I guess similarly to some degree, had a very meandering start to my career. I really didn't know what I wanted to do when I got out of college. So I pretty much tried to be opportunistic or open to new opportunities. My first, what I call real job, was because I met somebody in a bar. And that's fortunately led to one job. The next job, I happened to be working for a nonprofit, and we were leasing space from a company. And because I was going to the office every day and willing to do just about anything that was necessary, I was able to move over to what ended up being a private equity firm that I was able to work at for nearly 15 years. And I felt fortunate in that we focused primarily on agricultural assets and renewable energy projects. I knew absolutely nothing about finance, and I knew absolutely nothing about agriculture when I first got started. I mean, I said, what should I do? And they said, well, why don't you drive out onto the farm and sort of figure out what we're supposed to be doing? And I was like, okay, I can do that. So spent a lot of time driving around with farmers on ranches. That's their office. Let's just get in the pickup truck and drive around, sort of try to understand what their problems are and how they're trying to solve some of these problems. I found that working for this particular private equity firm, though, was a wonderful education in terms of viewing any opportunity or an asset kind of like a sandbox or a puzzle, in which you could take however the pieces are arranged right now, and then you could actually rearrange them to make something new, and theoretically, hopefully, add value through that process. And while I was there, I was able to start, because I didn't know anything about finance, I said, you know what, and neither did anybody else in my office, now that I think about it. I was like, oh, maybe I should go back to business school, because that would be helpful to me and to them. So was fortunate enough to do that, and decided while I was in grad school that I'd like to try to also start to work a little bit more in international development. So was able to convince my bosses to let me start to work on projects overseas. And in one in particular, I remember it was primarily an avocado and citrus orchard. And we had this opportunity COVID had just started, or I guess it was about a year in. And we had this opportunity to actually improve the local community and our labor force on the farm. And we developed this whole entire plan in which we were going to be able to build housing for them on the property. We bought a second farm nearby, so they were going to end up being able to have work year-round. We were going to do this whole entire skills development program, educational programs for their kids, for those who were, had migrated either from Venezuela or Haiti primarily, or Bolivia. We were going to try to figure out ways to get them a legal pathway in Chile. So it was the first time I got really excited. I mean, a lot of other projects were fun, but this one, I got really excited about all the things that we might be able to do with it. Unfortunately, it didn't work. It was a bad avocado harvest that year, so we kind of ran out of money. But in any event, it really stuck with me, sort of how excited I got by that opportunity of trying to make a real impact and difference in more local communities and having them sort of be a part of that journey and contribute to it. So through that exercise, I was able to meet a particular team at the Nature Conservancy. So we were working with them on this particular investment. And a few years later, I decided I wanted to try to shift and gain more operational experience. So I went to work for a private groundwater management firm in California. And after that, the truth is I would have had to move to California to be able to keep working there, and I wasn't really interested in doing that. So I left, and fortunately, the same group let me know that there was an opportunity to start working in the impact investments team, and it just seemed to bring together this, what I'd come to really become interested in, which is trying to unlock finance, capital from third parties to be able to develop sustainable projects, impactful projects that help local communities and also further our conservation goals. So that's kind of why I'm here now.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your stories. They're really incredible stories. Now I want to dive a little bit more into what it's like to work where you work. So you all work in various different organizations. So talk a little bit about what your day-to-day is like, talk a little bit about your role generally in the organization, and what are some of the challenges that you face and some of the opportunities that you see.
Cool. So I work for JPMorgan Chase. We're a large company you've probably heard of. We're the biggest bank in the US, the most valuable bank in the world by market cap. And we offer a massive range of financial services from asset and wealth management, investment banking, payments, treasury, securities, credit cards, retail banking. And we have clients ranging from individuals to companies and small businesses and governments all around the world. So we have a very large footprint. Within this massive organization, I'm in the corporate responsibility department, and within that, the corporate sustainability team. So our role is basically to serve as a sort of strategy and advisory function across the bank's different lines of business, connecting dots between the various teams that touch these issues on climate and sustainability, helping to set firm-wide strategy, track progress against our climate targets and to set those targets, and respond to the policy and regulatory environment. To just go one layer deeper, I'm on the strategic engagement function. So I spend a lot of time thinking about sort of how to position our firm effectively in the external environment on these issues. In practice, day to day, that's things like managing relationships with nonprofits, think tanks, trade associations, universities, a wide range of sort of sustainability related relationships, planning our presence at sort of external touch points like COP, New York Climate Week, and also sort of tracking and interpreting the climate and energy policy landscape, which has been very interesting over the last 3 years because it's been changing a lot. But so I think on the challenges and opportunities side, I mean, there's a lot. And I think like all challenges kind of are opportunities. One of the things that I've noticed is that a lot of our partners are thinking about sort of in real time how to respond to rapid changes in markets and policies and how to position themselves to still be able to create impact in this political environment. And it's been very interesting to see the response of different organizations on that. So like some of them have pivoted their messaging a little bit where instead of maybe leading with the goal being emissions reductions, it's about the energy transition can strengthen the competitiveness of American companies on a global stage, or improve energy security, and you can that can all be true at the same time, and so I think a lot of sort of nonprofits and the effective ones are very nimble and responsive in that way. So I think that's both like a challenge because things are constantly changing, but also a way to sort of broaden the tent and expand the scope of influence to make progress on the energy transition. Another interesting one is for a large, international company like JPMorgan, we are exposed to very different regulatory and policy regimes in different geographies, and sometimes competing ways. So sometimes there's a risk that we could be regulated to do or like mandated to do something in Europe that would actually be illegal to do in the U.S. So like that hasn't exactly come to pass, but there are tensions in that way. So that's very interesting and complex to navigate. So I could go on, but I'll leave it there for now.
And just a follow-up question, how big is the team that you work with?
So we're 40.
40?
Yep, and we're spread sort of around the world. I'm in DC, and we're roughly half split between New York and DC. But we do have a London office and a Hong Kong presence, as well as India.
Wow.
And our team, and just to go a little deeper, like our team has sort of 3 overarching mandates. We have a $1 trillion green finance commitment by 2030 that we sort of helped set that target for the firm and tracking how much we do each year on that. We have 9 net zero aligned emissions intensity reduction targets for our finance portfolio. And then we also have JPMorgan's own sort of internal decarbonization goals, so reducing the emissions of our own operations. So different parts of our team are responsible for each of those different areas.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, same question for you.
All right. Well, unlike JP Morgan, my company is like teeny, right? And in fact, right, to more describe my company or what I do, my company is a startup, and I'm an entrepreneur. So, essentially, Intention Climate Fund, what we have been trying to create is the Robin Hood for climate impact investing. So, so kind of what I do as an entrepreneur, right? One was, a few years ago, actually come up with this like burning problem that was keeping me up at night, which was, hey, I've spent so much time in this like industry, being like energy, like clean energy and climate, and working on a lot of times with the finance side, and why is it I don't have any investments in this in my own portfolio? So, and oh my goodness, is there a business opportunity there? Because at that point, I've been in 5 startups where I was someone else's employee, and a previous startup where I was a founder or co-founder. And so, again, this was like a light bulb idea that was going on, and it literally kept me up at night. So, so it's kind of taking that like vague problem, something that I, wanted to do personally, because it was very personal to me, because I was like, why don't I have some more of my money in this space? I've been creating, professionally, I've created opportunities for all these people before. And then, in terms of answering that question, kind of coming up with this space is kind of off limits to regular people. And then trying to be like, okay, well, is there a need to solve that? And so figuring out that, yes, there's a way to solve this. So, part of the entrepreneurial journey is then kind of deciding to do something. I formed a company. We have pivoted several times, because initially what we were going to do is basically invent energy annuities. Then we kind of pivoted from that to more like, okay, well, how about we create ways for people to invest in solar panels as a little bit more tangible kind of product, as opposed to energy annuities, which, like, okay, if you worked at Enron, you get it, right? But if you didn't work at Enron, it might be a little bit kind of like weird. So the concept of like investing in solar panels, but the solar panels don't have to be on your roof, and so that became an idea. And then as we kind of rolled out the idea, and we're doing our customer discovery, because that's another part of being an entrepreneur, is going out and talking to people. And then we found that people were far more interested in things with higher risk, right? Because when they asked me, like, hey, what kind of returns can I get from investing in solar panels? I'm like, yeah, kind of single digit. And they're like, that's kind of boring. So then we ended up going to a climate tech venture, and figuring out, like, okay, what were the legal structures that would allow us to do this democratization, because that was very important to me as a social entrepreneur. And then we did. We launched a fund. We've now got money in this fund. It's called the Intention Climate Fund. But, and this is part of the entrepreneurial journey, is like, okay, figuring out, is this actually the right thing to be doing at this moment in time, right? So I'm now in the process of making those really tough decisions about, like, is this a good vehicle for my investors? given all the changes in policy, given the needs, and should I actually be returning this money to my investors and finding something else to do? So that is the entrepreneur's journey in a nutshell. Happy to go into more details on anything. So.
Fantastic.
Thanks for sharing. I think it's a really good dovetail from like the entrepreneurial side to like the venture capital side, which is the world I live in. So I work at this firm called Collaborative Fund. Collaborative Fund it's been around since 2010. We've always invested at the intersection of profit and good. Two main things that we try to answer when we try to invest in a company. One, does this make the world a better place? Two, will a villain invest in this? And what we mean by villain is like, will this be scalable beyond the like social good part? Like, will this actually make ends meet? Will this pencil out? Will this make economic sense? Will people actually transfer their behavioral change to buy this new product good, even though it's better for you, but it's also better for the world at the same time? A really good example of this that we always use, obviously Tesla. Now, that's maybe so good of an example depending on how you see it, but electric vehicles in general, like they are really fun to drive, but they also are better for the world. And if we want to debate if they actually are better for the world or not, I can definitely debate you afterwards. They are. But in general, that's been always the core thesis. I mean, some core investments that you may have heard of, Beyond Meat, Impossible Burger, Lyft, Reddit, Blue Bottle Coffee, Sweet Green, amongst others, and we've always invested at the seed stage, usually at a lead check. What that means is we take about 10% ownership and we become on the board, essentially. And so that's the sort of focus area for Collaborative Fund. We also have a Series A, Series B fund as well, doing later stage checks as well. Now, we're a team of about 12 investment professionals, about 10 on the back office, kind of mostly New York, also San Francisco, and some remote too. But the day-to-day of an investor is super fascinating because you basically are basically a master of none, essentially, but at the same time you have to really learn fast to be an expert in certain industries. So my mornings tend to look like a lot of what I call brain work. So usually I would have a call with a founder or two in the morning. And then before that call, I'll be diving very, very deep into their deck, the market, their technology, understanding their patents, understanding the pros and cons of the scalability of the technology to really make sure I'm prepped and ready for a call with this entrepreneur. Usually these entrepreneurs are incredibly gifted and incredibly smart in their field, and you want to be able to maybe match that caliber, essentially. And so the ability for your intellectual curiosity to be itched by investing is so fun because you get to like one day learn about like the battery supply chain, and then the next you'll learn about next generation geothermal where someone's drilling a hole that's 20 kilometers underneath the ground. You're like, is this even possible? And so it's super fun in that way for sure. Now, some of the challenges on the venture capital side of things is that venture capital, especially in climate, is a very small sliver of the pie. There's some worlds where venture capital is a really great asset class, and that's typically software because it can scale fast. There's not a lot of assets in the ground to go ahead and create that change that people are looking for, but usually it's high risk, high reward, and you're trying to get ideally $1 billion outcome within 10 years. So the time horizons and the scale sometimes doesn't really fit perfectly within the climate world, and sometimes it's hard to fit those those boundaries on venture capital investing within the climate space. So that's a really tough thing that I'm like realizing and learning. And also about 3% of funding that goes into climate is actually from venture capital. There's a lot more asset-based financing that happens. And so realizing that too, that some of these companies are going to take longer, but also they tend to have different just risk profiles too, and return profiles as well. So that's a challenge, but it's been so fun to just like learn day in and day out and just become so knowledgeable of certain niche industries that you never thought you might learn. And then at the same time, at the end of the day, you're just talking to a bunch of people that are at the top of their game and trying to make this world better. And that's what I have great gratitude for. Like the ability, like a lot of my days is talking with people, and hearing and listening to like what the future that people want to build. I think that's what makes venture capital a really interesting asset class, is that you're betting on assets that don't exist now, but will exist 10 years from now. And it's such an interesting space to be, to envision the world that we all want to live in.
Very cool. As slightly differently, I work for what I would consider to be a fairly large nonprofit. The Nature Conservancy employs over 6,000 people. It has a presence in just over 80 countries and an office in all 50 states. Given that I'm fairly new there, the way I've sort of interpreted it, it's in my day-to-day, I feel like I'm working with local government, federal government, and then the United Nations, sort of like all at once, all at the same time, and try to figure out where I need to go to get a specific answer, or in particular, if I'm working with a particular group of people to try and launch their idea or try to figure out how to finance a certain conservation effort that they want to try and promote. It's an incredibly mission-driven and values-oriented place to work. The people are incredibly smart and all very passionate about the work that they're doing, and wanting to try to further it and further our ultimate goal, which is to conserve as much land and water as possible for all of us. I work within a smaller team called NatureVest, which is about 40, we're about 40 people. There's 3 different teams within NatureVest. There's the financial advisory team, which primarily works on helping actually like entrepreneurs or smaller projects try to figure out how to scale up their business, and then ultimately typically suggest some sort of sustainable finance options for them. There's the impact investments team, which I'm a part of, and then the impact management team, which typically takes over if we're able to launch any kind of an investment product or vehicle. We hand it over to the management team to then implement conservation outcomes and monitor them and report on them afterwards. My day-to-day is typically, I guess it depends on the day, but it's either speaking with asset managers and investment managers who might be interested in working with the Nature Conservancy and sort of seeing how they might be able to blend their capital, really, or their assets with our technical expertise and how we might be able to provide that service to them. It's also working with internal business units on some of their efforts and priorities to see if we can develop an overall product or raise capital in order to be able to further that end. Whether it's, some days it's forestry in Brazil, some days it's working on a corporate partner supply chain to try to figure out how it can be sustainably financed. So it's learning something new every day, which I really enjoy. Similarly, I really enjoy the challenge of constantly learning, I think, and it certainly keeps me engaged. So.
Very cool, very cool. So just to go a little bit more in detail on that topic, what are some of the skills that you think are essential in your work? So there's technical skills, like some of you went back to school and got an MBA to learn more about finance, for example. And then there's all these other skills you're talking about, talking to different stakeholders like local governments, the UN, potential clients and whatnot. So what kind of strengths do you bring to those relationship building capacity? And talk a little bit about like what you learned in school versus like what you learned on the job and your internships and like your various career opportunities.
Cool. Also, just really quick fun fact before I talk about that. So JPMorgan gave a grant that helped establish NatureVest. And actually,
Oh, really?
so yeah, I don't know if you knew that. This is like, this is a long time ago. This is well before I was there. Yeah, you're welcome. But our former, before we had this title, basically our chief sustainability officer, Matt Arnold, was responsible for basically giving a $21 million grant to the Nature Conservancy over 10 years. And Matt Arnold now runs that team.
Exactly.
So
he's my boss.
A little bit of self-dealing, maybe. I don't know. But anyway, it's a great partnership between sort of JPMorgan and the Nature Conservancy.
That's very cool.
Yeah. Okay, skills. So I was thinking about this one. I want to really harp a little bit first on like soft skills, because I think we all are probably in the process of like thinking about and developing hard skills. Those are important. We'll talk about those too. But soft skills are, I think, equally important. It's almost like really obvious to say, but still maybe underappreciated. So when I first came to JPMorgan, I overlapped with our previous global head of sustainability for about 2 months before she left for a different role. And she gave me a piece of advice that stuck with me, that has proven to be true time and time again. And it was very simple. Relationships are everything. So the ability and the soft skills it takes to create, maintain, and strengthen relationships are just crucial to being effective in the professional world, and to getting things done, especially in a fast-paced, complex organization. You need to, again, it sounds like simple, but like being liked will make you better at your job. It'll make it easier to manage projects, solve problems, and get things done. There's nothing, and I mean this in a very literal way, nothing gets done at a place like JPMorgan without cross-team collaboration. So we are constantly working with teams across the bank. And so relationships are so important. I think like it's probably intuitive what it takes to like build and maintain good relationships. Be nice, be positive, assume the best in other people, etc. It also helps you get promoted. If senior people like you and want to keep you around, that's one of the ways to do it. So I just think, and they can, these sort of soft skills can be developed in the same way that hard skills can be. So I want to make sure that those are sort of spoken to. As for hard skills, I mean, there's a huge range, and in part because the types of roles you could do at a company like JPMorgan are very broad. You could be doing banking or investing, or you could be doing something a little more fluffy like what I do in corporate sustainability, where we're not doing deals, but we're supporting the people that do them. We have people that come from policy backgrounds, and now we're handling our ESG policy and regulatory affairs work. We have engineers that are helping figure out how to decarbonize our physical assets like our buildings and our data centers. So I think, again, there's probably something sort of intuitive here about, if you really want to do finance, studying finance, business, accounting, these things are important, data analysis, policy analysis, etc. So I think, I think those are probably some of the ones that rise to the top.
That's great.
Yeah, I'd have to totally agree as far as the soft skills and how important those are. And particularly if for an entrepreneur, right? I told you that there's like my experience at Enron and like financial structuring, that's kind of creates some of the initial insight for my, the original idea I had for my business. And that's what I would call, that would be a hard skill, right? The ability to like analyze stuff, right? But obviously, like what we ended up pivoting to had nothing to do with the original idea, and the skills of like being able to listen, right? Listen to what's the market telling you, what are your customers telling you, the people you work with, what are they hearing? So that is very important. I'd say for an entrepreneur, you also actually just need to have sometimes a little bit of a lot of resilience and grit, right? Because frankly, a lot of what you'll be hearing is no. So just being able to kind of receive that and then be able to make a decision. It's like, is that no because I was just talking to the wrong customer and I need to go talk to these customers, or is it no, like, or is kind of, is this like a bad idea, right? So and in order to do that, you need to have like that kind of resilience. You need to have a fair bit of confidence in yourself at a time when, a lot of people, it's so easy. You talked about imposter syndrome. Everyone has imposter syndrome. Every single entrepreneur I know has imposter syndrome. And like being able to just put that aside and kind of move forward. I'd call that more of a soft skill as well. And there was another one that I was gonna share, but so anyway, that I think those are really. Oh, I know. There's also just being able to kind of groom, a little bit around instinct and intuition rather than hard analytics, right? Hard analytics are important, but then also just having that instinct, intuition, the also the ability to kind of build teams, to be able to build teams that are way stronger than you are, and have skills that are much deeper than yours, right? And of course the ability to build those teams and to build confidence in those teams and get them to move in areas where lots of people are telling you no, right? That's really hard. But those I think are for the entrepreneurial side, those are really, really important. And as someone who, like, I definitely started my career as like, I'm the analytical person, I'm the smart person, like kind of graduating from that has been, very much a important part of my leadership and entrepreneurial journey.
There's a few things that I would love to like double click on. One, initiative is like one that I think is like super important. So the combination of creativity and initiative for me are like a superpower combo. So the ability to think of like a new idea and then actually go ahead and execute. I think that's what's brought me quite far in my career. So instead of like, hey, I have an idea and then go get it approved by your boss, like actually go do the idea, rapidly prototype, and be like, hey, here's the outcome, here's the data. I think we should like put some resources here. And then there's one less decision for your boss to make, and it will make your boss look good as well. So that has been, I think, really, really important. And then intuition, I think, is one that's really, really hard to describe, but not enough talked about. It's a really funky, weird term, like what is intuition, where does it come from, and so on, but it's like kind of trusting your gut and being open to it. I think of the things that AI is really good at. I think we should be focusing on what AI is not good at, and I think intuition is one of them. Abstract thinking is another one as well. I also think of just so many soft skills that AI is not like fundamentally stripping away from what makes us human is going to be what sets us apart in terms of being able to use these systems and these technologies and leverage your own humanity to go ahead and build the things you want out there. So like seeing what maybe is coming and trying to leverage your own skill set to make sure you're valuable with what's out there is going to be very, very important, and something I think about daily given this new state of the world and economy and how fast everything's moving for sure. One little tidbit that I would like to share is I worked for this company called Unreasonable. Cool org and also cool name, like totally awesome. The whole premise was basically we want to support unreasonable entrepreneurs that want to change the world. But what was really cool was that we basically hosted these fantastic like world-class retreats essentially for these entrepreneurs. We brought in investors, mentors, and basically did like a big like 10-day sort of retreat for these entrepreneurs so they can keep doing amazing work for the world. And the thesis behind this work that we do was that business is dependent on relationships. Relationships are dependent on trust, and trust is dependent on vulnerability. So how do we go straight to vulnerability to build the rest of it, essentially? And I think being okay with being vulnerable actually lets the whole room become more vulnerable, and bringing in your own humanity is super, super, I think, I've always been a little bit afraid of becoming vulnerable, and then when it actually ever comes out, it actually helps other people also open up, and then you really understand true motivations, but also get to the crux of an issue and build a lot of trust. And I think that's been the best way for me to build with these relationships that have honestly been so supportive throughout my career.
I love that, leveraging your own humanity.
That's good. That's good. It's a good line. I think you really kind of hit the nail on the head with both communication, establishing trust. In particular, I guess I think about trust in two different ways also, and I think it'd probably work in almost any industry. One of them is being open and vulnerable in the relationships, curious about the people that you're meeting and talking to them and really trying to engage with them to understand whatever they're trying to explain to you or a problem from their perspective. And I think, that sort of leads, that curiosity leads to having open and honest relationships and allow trust to be established. I think the other part is, or the other way I think of it as well, is within a professional setting, there was this quote or this phrase that I read a number of years ago. There's this guy, Nick Majuli, and he came up with this phrase of being at work in order to advance, you want to become an uncertainty killer. So whether that's with your coworkers on your team, whether that's with your boss, whether you're leading a team and it's supporting the people who are reporting to you, you want to do whatever you can to make sure that those people trust you and that they're going to turn to you and they know that you're going to get something done. You're going to be able to execute on something. So I think those are kind of two pretty important aspects of earning people's trust and hopefully maintaining it.
Awesome. I have some more questions, but I want to pause and open up the floor to questions from you all. So if you have a question, yeah, go ahead.
Hi everyone. Thank you guys so much for coming. It's been so interesting. My name's Grace. I'm a senior at the college. I'm trying to kind of think about what next step to take. And I'm curious, if you were graduating college right now, given like the current landscape, would you go into climate investment? And if so, like what stage, whether that's venture capital, private equity, or investment banking? Or would you pivot to an industry where you can learn skills and eventually leverage?
I wouldn't be. I don't know. I don't know what you guys think. I mean, I'm the wrong person probably asked to, given that I took such like a meandering path and just sort of try to figure out what was next. I think either way, you know what, I would try to go into this particular space, but I'd also say, and rightly or wrongly, like keep yourself open to other opportunities that might end up coming around, because like you don't know what might end up attracting your attention, or an opportunity to delve deeper into whatever industry or track you decide to go down. So I don't know. How do you guys feel about it?
Yeah. Can I ask you, like, what are you studying, and also like what interests you the most?
So I study environmental science, data science, and economics, and I'm really interested in using finance to drive change. I'm taking this class on venture capital, and I find that interesting, but I also have also heard what you kind of said, how it's kind of drying up in the climate tech industry. And so I'm just curious, if that's the best space to be in right now, because I would love to go and make deals and invest in amazing entrepreneurs. You guys have the coolest jobs, but is that the best place to start right now?
My perspective on, so if you're thinking specifically on VC investing, right? I would say it is not the entry point to get into climate, right? I mean, from the perspective of an entrepreneur who goes and pitches, who has pitched VCs, to be honest with you, I want the person on the other side of the table to have some experience. So what I would say is, if this is something that you're very interested in, just go figure out how to work in climate, and then eventually, and I'm not saying like 20 years down the road, but like a few years down the road, kind of can migrate into more of that, investing role, if that's still really what you want to do, but with the real world perspective of what you might be investing in.
Yeah, the other thing, at least on the VC front, they tend to like folks with a decent amount of experience that have some real world experience, because that is like speaks dividends, especially when you build relationships with entrepreneurs. In terms of like the industry drying up and so on, like I'm gonna be completely honest, my firm, we have a very generalist approach to the way we look at impact, and so we're focused on climate for a while, but now we're pretty much double everything's kind of AI at this point. And it makes sense because there's so much happening, there's a lot of growth happening there, and I don't blame the company, but it's something that's hard for me to like fathom because I'm a climate person at heart, right? And it's something that I'm constantly toiling with for sure. And so, I think there's multiple different ways to go, but what I would always say when you're thinking about these next steps is like, see what sticks with your heart. Like your heart knows best, your intuition knows best. Like if you have this step and it may not be exactly what you thought on a piece of paper, but your heart's like screaming like, yes, like this feels good, this is how I want to grow, do it. And with venture capital, any of these roles, like you can come in and out of it. Like what's really cool about venture capital is you can go back to what's being called like an operator and go into the startup world and come back to being an investor and so on. It doesn't have to be a one-track mindset for sure. And so there's multiple different things that will come to be, especially in this environment and this economy. Like learn however you can in whatever way possible. And then definitely when we're still going to need to solve these crazy problems in the climate space, no matter who's in office, like we need to be working towards this like end goal and end resolution. Climate's not going away anytime soon, and so like definitely always pursue that as the main goal, but the way you get there might be meandering, just like all of us here.
And one other thing, I mean, Vid has said earlier that kind of the VC investing is only like 3% of climate investing. So I would say this is someone fresh out of school, like look for places. If you want to do investing, find ways to get lots of transactions, and the transactions where you're going to see more transactions related to climate aren't going to be on the VC side. It's going to be more on the things like project finance and, kind of other things that are, really around deploying assets rather than kind of building entrepreneurs. Now, if you're interested in entrepreneurship and supporting startups, that's very different, right? So.
If I could just also, clearly this is like, I think like you're kind of putting your finger on something that's like really important and fundamental. And like, I agree with what Vid said, like, careers make sense looking backwards, but going forwards, like we're all just kind of like feeling it out as we go. Like it doesn't always make sense. So that's one thing. I also think, and this is something that I was like gonna speak to later on a different question, but like there's just an observation that I have is that there are a lot of people that have come to the climate field from different fields, and they bring those experiences and skills, and it's incredibly valuable. There are so many examples of this. I mean, I've seen renewable energy project developers that are putting like steel in the ground. Like they hire engineers and they hire construction managers that weren't necessarily doing solar, but like their skills are applicable. You could get an MBA that's like a traditional MBA and then just like apply that in a corporate sustainability role. There's lots of examples of that. So I think it's not necessarily like a bad strategy to get a skill and then like find a way to pivot into like the perfect role for you later on, and like do extracurriculars along the way that like build your climate fluency. But like I think that long game view is not a bad approach too, and it's something that a lot of people have done like very successfully. So
Very cool. Yeah, I'll get you guys in a second. So you want to go first.
Kind of along the lines, but like a different take maybe. I think that the case of like climate is not going anywhere, maybe like where the work is done is gonna shift in the current environment. But I'm curious from like your various approaches to the climate finance space, like what are the technologies or solutions that you think are going to continue to have significant investment and work in the next 4 years that, well, like some other spaces might not?
in the U.S.
Anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Does anybody else want to start? I have a thought, but I don't think it's
I'll say, so, you know, again, going back to the what type of investment, right? I mean, certainly when it comes to climate, right, policy support it's key, right? It's always been key because ultimately, you know, environmental, climate, you know, there's this unpriced externality that's out there. That's why something needs to be fixed, and that's why, you know, policy kind of goes hand in hand with something which is about, you know, improving the world on the dimensions of those unpriced externalities. So just in terms of where there's a huge amount of like activity and interest from a policy perspective right now that's also clean, right? Certainly around geothermal, right? Certainly around nuclear. Some people might not consider that clean. Other people, oh, it's low carbon, right? Zero carbon, let's go for it. Like in this country, that's probably the two biggest areas I see. And then there's just more generic kind of grid resilience type stuff, right? You know, how do we get more power across the power lines and get more flexible siting and things that just kind of improve the ability to build power-related infrastructure. And in the long game is that, you know, electrification is a way of decarbonizing, even if not all of the electricity at one point is fully zero carbon, right? But we know that the electricity in the future will be more and more zero carbon, so like what can we do to, you know, again, make the grid itself more able to accept the electricity. So those are the areas where I think that's worth looking at. You know, if you were interested in more kind of researchy types of things, I'd suggest another set of things to look at.
I would also just add, I agree with everything you said. There's a lot of project development happening in like solar. And when you think about like the trajectory of solar, it's like an S curve, you know, and it's continuing to grow, and I think the outlook for that is still pretty good. And there are a lot of project developers that are hiring, you know, people that understand project finance or how to just like manage a project through each stage of permitting and site selection and, you know, and then contracting and EPC and all that stuff. So I think there are certain like clean energy fields where like business is still relatively booming and there are opportunities there. Another sort of random place that I've seen in the corporate sustainability world, and I think it's a little hard to be prescriptive about how to like get to this place, but there are a lot of big companies that need to, or that have climate goals and renewable energy goals. Like a lot of big tech companies have goals of procuring 100% renewable energy, some of them 24/7, all the entire year. So there are a lot of roles that where they want people that can negotiate a PPA contract, or like have experience like thinking about how to create the strategy. And again, some of these tech companies also are the data center people that are building massive data centers, trying to, you know, contract for like nuclear and geothermal and think for power and renewables and gas and other things. So I think like that experience somewhere at the intersection of like building stuff and doing like the business elements of contracting it, I think there's opportunity there, and especially just like in the like data centers. I feel like I hear about data centers more than I ever thought I would be, so there's opportunity there too.
I mean, I think like understanding that there's Jock talked about it earlier, but like there's a change in narrative happening. Energy security is a big term that's being used, right? It's like how do we make sure we are resilient with our own energy grid, and less reliant on exports and imports, for example. But then also I think of like how do I frame this? There's essentially like it'll come back to me, but essentially like really understanding like that I think climate's going to be going, like I might not even use the word climate in the next 4 years, right? We're going to might use the term like energy transition, and I know Mr. JPMorgan over here is already using that with all of his clients, and that's fine. That's just what we do, right? But we're all are focused on the same thing. And I think like really honing in on like where are these coming from, and like I also think of like supply chain resilience too, with these tariffs coming in and out, and like building that out and making that more resilient as well. I think another thing to think about too is, I hate to be the Debbie Downer, but we aren't moving fast enough for all our climate goals. Like we all know this, and let's like call it as it is. Like we're gonna need to adapt to this new reality of a hotter world and changing, more extreme weather, like where there's no insurance that like in California, home insurance is not a thing for fire insurance, for example, or hurricane insurance in Florida because the storms are getting too crazy, it doesn't pencil out. Like we need more adaptive solutions for this new reality that we're going to be in. And I think that is going to be a super important aspect. I hate to say this as well, but geoengineering is going to be a lot more prominent than we think in the next 10 years. How we're going to maybe reflect more sunlight artificially. I know these are crazy topics and we don't really want to talk about them, but we're coming to a point where we're really starting to deal with realities of our consequences, unfortunately. And I think it's important to like meet that reality head on and see like, hey, how can I continue doing good work, understanding this. The other side I would like to say, I'm usually not a big fan of saying this, but I think this is the moment to meet it at. It's AI. Like go into the way they use artificial intelligence to really improve a lot of backbreaking work in a lot of different industries. For example, there's this really cool company called Spark AI. They do site selection, so like helping renewable energy firms find the right companies, the right like sites for renewable energy projects, and going through permitting and so on. And it takes so much effort to do that, but they do it really, really fast. But I think like seeing those climate/AI initiatives are definitely going to have its heyday for sure, and more to come 100% as artificial intelligence only gets better.
Can we apply that to like the regulatory regime, so permitting is sort of like
Yeah. Oh yeah.
10?
I know.
Everything's
We should talk to
currently
Elon Musk about that. We'll see what happens.
He has an initiative.
Yeah,
He's starting
yeah,
an
yeah.
initiative.
Doge
I think-
for permitting.
Yeah. I want to make sure that we can go ahead and take any other questions that are.
Okay, great. Question in the back. Nope. Okay.
This is a question I think more for Michael, but definitely to everyone. I'm somebody who's interested in agriculture, nature, conservation in general. I wanted to understand what's it like making the financial case for nature and conservation in general.
I think it's getting better, and I think to some degree it goes back to some of the language changes, like starting to use terms like resilience, you know, and then it's also as more and more companies and farmers and investment firms are starting to recognize that the more resilient you can be, or the more sustainable practices you start to implement, and some of it is like we need to shift the narrative around this. A lot of times I think previously those were seen as a drag on returns. You know, it says like, well, I need to make double-digit returns, and if I implement these practices, I'm only going to hit 8%, or I'm not going to hit my 12 or 17 or whatever it is that I promised my LPs. So as practices continue to get better and people realize that in the long term, it actually will start to, if your water quality is better, then you'll grow more crops, like your yield will be higher. If your soil is healthier, your yield will be higher, you'll use less water. So that starts to reduce your inputs and ends up, increasing your margins, and you end up being more profitable long term and more resilient. Like you're gonna have a better crop year in and year out. So I think that case is developing, but it's there to be made. I definitely think it's there to be made. I hope that answers your question.
Do you have any questions that we haven't addressed yet? Yeah.
I guess, thanks all for being here, but my question is more like for those of us that are working maybe in a non-climate related role and looking to get into the climate space, like how important is it to have like a sub-interest within it, like a specialty that you want to pursue? Like I'm interested in biodiversity or solar or water, or, is it feasible to, just want to get into the space no matter where it is?
So there's definitely, just over the last several years, been a lot of people who are, just very passionate about it. They're learning about climate and then want to kind of transition to get into the space. And there's a couple ways to think about that, right? One is to try and switch industries. And there are lots of organizations that have formed to kind of help people do that. For example, there's Terra.do, which creates these learning cohorts so people can kind of learn and figure out where their skills might apply. There's Work on Climate, which is it's a free kind of Slack community. I'm on the advisory board there, and they've been trying to really help people kind of mobilize their talents to get into climate. The other way to think about it is like how to take what you're already doing within your own company and kind of how to make your job a climate job, right? So what can you do to build, sustainability or into what you're doing, or to be a force within your company to get them to do things differently. Recently, I had a chance to participate in a call with a guy who led the formation of one of Microsoft's communities of practice. And so Microsoft's a big organization. What they have internally, it's almost like their own internal little Slack groups. Actually, they're probably using Teams rather than Slack, but to create just communities of practice, right? So just like interest areas where employees band together, and their sustainability community of practice ended up being one of the largest. I think it was like either 10,000 or 40,000 employees across the company, and it would just as part of this like little internal volunteer group, doing things like either like just learning skills that they wanted to learn, or figuring out how to pressure Microsoft to go be more sustainable in terms of where it's sourcing its power for its data centers, challenging Microsoft on why it was selling AI and cloud services to oil and gas companies so they can push more oil out of the ground. So it took on a wide range of things, and so now like 0.5% of people at Microsoft have, it's probably even less than that, have sustainability as part of their official job function. But that was a way of creating ways for people who weren't necessarily sustainability professionals to have some type of sustainable impact. I'm sure that some of the folks who are in those communities of practice learned something and then kind of decided, okay, great, I really want to do more of this, and maybe left Microsoft to go found a startup or to join another company that's doing things more very specific to climate rather than to selling software. Right? But yeah, that was just a long, perhaps too long a story about just like, okay, within your own, kind of in place, like figuring out how to, build more, sustainability into your current role, or not necessarily having to leave. Both paths are viable.
The one thing I would add also to that is, I think you've got great points, is that the climate is all encompassing. Like, you can do any niche you want, and it's gonna be related one way or another with climate and the world around us, essentially. And so I think do what speaks to your heart, and then find the angle that makes sense towards what is that overlap. I mean, just an example, I'm part of the organizing team behind DC Climate Week, and we were trying to convey, like, we wanted to come up with 40 topics, or like the top 5 topics of climate, and it took us like months because there's so many cross-cutting topics in climate. Like, do we choose water or mobility or urban development, nature? There's so much to do in all these different sectors. So I would say, especially kind of starting off, the more you have like a sense of honing in terms of who you are and what speaks to your heart, and then going from there is an easier starting point, because there's just so much that you can do within the climate arena.
Well, we probably have time for one more question. Yeah.
I guess I'm curious about kind of the inertia that you're seeing towards climate right now, and I know, John, you mentioned kind of the shift in policy and the fact that, like, in the EU, the whole like corporate sustainability disclosure is going backwards, and here, if California doesn't kind of pass their sustainability efforts, the US is not really pushing things forward. And I feel like in the corporate sustainability space, that's really relevant for companies that are not only not that interested in climate, but jumpy about, using words like climate and sustainability. And so, I mean, you spoke a little bit about how you're changing your own narratives, but I'm just, I'm curious about like what specific areas of backsliding you are expecting in the next little while, or like particular challenges with talking to companies and investors and people who don't like these ideas. Yeah.
That's a great question. I'm thinking. So I think I would just maybe lightly also challenge the premise, which is I think that there will be some backsliding. There will also maybe not be backsliding in other ways. I think some companies, like, I think I've thought a lot about this, and I actually think like it's just going to take time before we actually know. But I think there's like when a company or an organization changes the language they use, I've had the question, like, is that symbolic or is it substantive? And like, if you do something symbolic, is it the beginning of backsliding, or is it actually just like changing the window dressing when the real work doesn't change? And I think there are cases of both. So I think I think that it kind of goes back to something I said earlier, which is like a lot of people in this space are nimble and smart and understand that. And actually, and the energy transition is in such a sort of phase that I think that it's maybe sort of fortunate that building renewable energy like is energy security, and a lot of the goals of the climate goals and emissions reductions dovetail really well with energy security, American energy dominance, unleashing American energy. These things that are like now kind of in vogue at the federal level. Similarly, like there's a lot of bipartisan and Republican support for geothermal, nuclear. These are zero carbon sources of power, hydro. There's also support for coal and gas. So, it's, I think time will tell, and yeah, that's probably the best answer.
No, thank you.
I think the backsliding, the most amount of backsliding we're seeing is really in terms of how much people, companies, society, governments are willing to pay for decarbonization, right? And so I think what's happening is a combination of two things. One, people kind of realizing that some of these things are more expensive than we thought, right? And then there's other things where, okay, great, subsidies are being, or the policy support that was there in a previous administration or whatever is being pulled, so the net cost to somebody else has now just gone up because the subsidy has been pulled, right? That's ultimately like what I see from a black sliding perspective. I think if you look at the global megatrend, it's still towards decarbonization, right? It's just a question of how fast in the next couple years and how much is it gonna cost.
I think it's also just like sum it all up for everyone here, and this is all the reason why we're in climate finance, right? Like, ideally, like, the whole point is that without all these subsidies and so on, like, this pencils out on paper, and if it works economically, it can scale much faster, right? And so that's where the true scale happens. If you don't need to depend on policy, you don't need to depend on, you know, XYZ, your grandma, whatever, like, this will work. Like, you give me this money and I'll make you X return dollars. Like, solar has proved that case. Batteries going there as well. Like, these cost curves are going down, and the macro trend is there. And I think that's what gives us all hope and why we're in this industry, is because it's penciling out no matter who's in office, and that's what matters at the end of the day in this economy.
I think also that it's also an opportunity. Like, if there are some companies or even countries that are starting to backslide, you know, it's an opportunity for others to become leaders in that particular space. And I think that is starting to happen, and it'll continue to happen. You know, we just may not be used to the fact that the U.S. isn't the first one through the door anymore. But
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time for this particular conversation, but I think our panelists will hang around and have dinner.